Hello, Brain Damaged Philosopher here. It's been a bit of a slow week, so I've decided that I'm going to release my next video in my lecture series on Eudaimonistic Egoism a little earlier than I would usually in my schedule, because usually I release roughly every week or so. This is going to especially work out since next week is finals week, so I'm going to be a little bit more busy, or at least a lot more stressed out, and that means less mental space to do philosophy. So, as a little bit of a recap, in the last video I covered why I think the fulfillment of our capacities as humans is probably the most efficient way to achieve happiness as humans. So, what I'm going to do in this video is actually describe what I think these capacities are. Now, I actually have a much longer treatise, a full-length treatise on this that I could link in the comments if you are interested in knowing more of the research behind why I say these capacities are fundamental human capacities that are, unique to us. But for this, I'm going to be primarily referencing knowledge that I've gained from reading those studies, but I'm not going to be able to reference those studies directly. But I encourage you to research and fact check anything I say here. So, I think before I go into specifics, though, I need to explain something about how I conceive of the fulfillment of human capacities. So, obviously, humans, being mammals and physical beings, share many needs and capacities with other mammals and animals and physical beings. If we go all the way back up the classification chain, right? And so that means that it's not just the capacities that are purely unique to us that are important for living a happy life, but also the needs and capacities that are not unique to us. And so the way I like to explain why I focus more on the capacities that are unique to us and the relative importance of the two groups of capacities is like this. If you're standing on the top of a pyramid, the part of the pyramid closest to you is going to be much larger in your vision because of perspective and much closer. And it's going to cover at least some parts of the pyramid that are lower down. And like that, once you've achieved a basic fulfillment of the needs and capacities that you share with your other mammals and primates, then, so once you've got a sound enough foundation that there's actually a pyramid to be standing on, the most important component to your happiness after that is going to be fulfilling the capacities that are unique to yourself. And the reason that's the case is because we evolve to act like the animals we are, not the amorphous blob of non-specific animal properties that we share with the other animals. All of the facilities, the capacities, and the needs that we have are meant to mesh together and orient towards the specific kind of being we are. Because we don't experience being an amorphous blob of common features that we share with other animals. We experience being the particular being we are, both the particular subtype, human, and also the particular being as in the particular individual we are. And so another way to explain it is that fulfilling the needs and capacities like food and shelter and companionship and sex and exercise, fulfilling the needs and capacities that we share with other animals are a necessary condition for happiness, because without them you're essentially very unhealthy and you're going to either die or fall apart psychologically. But they're not a sufficient condition for happiness. Whereas if you are actually in a position where you're capable of fulfilling your higher capacities, then that's a sufficient condition for happiness. Once you can get those down, you don't need anything more. It just so happens that in order to be capable of getting those higher capacities that are specific to you and specific to humans satisfied, you will need to satisfy the lower capacities and needs. And so I think it's more interesting to focus on these higher capacities that are unique to humans, because it's the sweet spot between things that are obvious that I think everyone knows we need, like food and shelter and so on, and things that are so specific to us as individuals that I couldn't really speak on, except for myself, because everybody is actually a different individual. But speaking about what all humans need is something that is a sweet spot where it's general enough where me speaking about it would be interesting to a wide audience, but not so general and obvious that everyone would just scoff and, not need to listen to me. And so, okay, so what are these capacities that are unique to humans? Well, I think they all center around the one thing that we know is actually unique to humans, and that is the capacity for abstract reasoning. Many animals have the capacity to solve simple puzzles or develop tools simply by experimenting with the affordances of physical objects, shoving a stick at a hole until, it goes in, or using a rock until you find the right angle that happens to work. And importantly, also, humans, so there are 16 properties that all human languages share. The most complex animal language, if I recall correctly, only has 4 of them. And these are properties including the ability to make almost infinite new sentences, like a combinatorial explosion, and having more abstract words for things, right? And those 2 in particular are things that animal languages don't share. And the reason I bring up language is because language is such an important component of being able to do abstract reasoning. Because an important part of abstraction is taking a group of properties that, describe a subsection of things that we find important to refer to as a single group, and actually combining all those properties into one thing, tying them together into a concept by giving them one name, a way to refer to them. Because otherwise they really stay separate. And language also gives us the means to actually encode relations between concepts and repeatable properties about the universe and descriptions of things in a way that you just can't get any way else. And so there's a reason that no other animals have the complex societies and have built the complex tools and modifications to the environment that humans have. There's some difference. And the thing that all of these important differences about how humans live that we can see between a human and even our closest primate, the chimpanzee, all have to do with the ability to think abstractly and come up with conclusions about our world and plans. Interestingly, chimpanzees actually can't imagine a state of the world in the future where they have a desire that they don't currently have, or don't have a desire that they do currently have. So again, that's an example of humans are able to actually plan ahead and think and abstract from themselves now to a abstract concept of themselves in the future that might have somewhat different properties. Likewise, early humans, I think before Homo erectus, didn't understand the idea that if a tool is useful to me now, if I pick up a rock and start using it as a tool, maybe I should save it for later. Instead, as soon as they're done using the tool, they just toss it aside. And again, this is an example of not being able to think abstractly and plan about the future. But there are other things that are related to this that are unique to humans. Again, with our unique capacity for language that can not just communicate concrete, immediate states of affairs, but complex internal states of mind and statements about the future and general statements that really can... Our capacity for abstract rationality combines with this unique capacity for language to mean that we, uniquely among animals, can interact with others not on the basis of instinct or fear or tribal hierarchy or familial hierarchy, but on the basis of explaining a mutual goal, a mutual benefit, or mutual idea that we can share with others that can convince them to work with us on the basis of something other than, some deep-seated, instinct to work with us already, or fear and violence, or something like that. And it allows us to, actually construct relations with people that are complex and nuanced and purposeful. And on the other side of this capacity for abstract rationality and planning for the future and communication with others allows us to create things that are unique and interesting and build on the work of others and modify the environment to suit us in much more radical ways than any other animal is capable of doing. And in ways that, instead of being built into our extended phenotype, are actually something that we come up with on the spot in a relatively speaking compared to how long it takes to evolve those kind of things. To actually think about our own particular situations and come up with solutions for them. And so all of these things, all of these capacities are unique to humans that are all kind of intertwined. I give them three names, right? There's creativity, there's rationality, and there's sociability. Creativity is our capacity to create new things that are an expression of our own minds and our own ability to plan and process our environment and work with other people. Expressions of ourselves and making things. Because we all know that one of the most satisfying, and in the long term, one of the most satisfying things that anyone can do is express themselves and develop their ability to express themselves somehow, express their personality and mind into something outside of themselves. And then rationality. This is the ability to think, to understand things, to be curious, to learn, and also to have a sense of one's own principle. Because someone who acts in a way that is in accordance with principles that they've come up with for themselves, who is, one might say, morally at peace with themselves, is the most enviable person. Someone who is truly morally at peace with themselves and has not made any other sacrifices to their happiness, that is the person that we truly all wish to be. And then, of course, we have sociability. And this is that capacity for meaningful two-way relationships based on common beliefs and ideas and goals that we can have with other people, where we communicate things to each other that are important and new and meaningful to both of us or to all parties involved. And so, of course, each of these capacities means something for how we should live our lives. For instance, if we don't ever produce anything new that is any expression of ourselves, if we're pure consumers, then, of course, it's hard to be happy. And so, even if we don't have a job, having a hobby, something that produces something meaningful and of worth, at least to us, is important. And producing something that is not just of worth and meaningfulness to us, but actually helps us live and survive, which is what we used creativity for when we evolved that ability, that's even more meaningful. This is why people love gardening, because they make something that they then actually consume that supports and sustains them. This is why people actually enjoy being independent, being able to provide for themselves in some way, even though it might ultimately rely on the existence of other people, because we are a social species. Not relying solely on one other, or a few other people for your existence is an important expression of the capacity to modify one's environment and use one's mind to support oneself. Likewise, with rationality, learning, obviously, and all of that, but also for the moral component, living in a way that one would find acceptable if someone else did it. And not just some abstract person, but someone else did it not far away from you, but to you or right next to you. That's the shortest way to live in a way that your social mind, which views yourself from the perspective of others, can most easily be satisfied with you. Because if you live in a way that you would be okay with or actually happy with other people living, then there's almost nothing that you can really fault yourself for. And then for sociability, working with other people on a voluntary basis instead of regressing to that tribal or violent instinct by, operating on the basis of shared beliefs, ideas, and values. That is one of the most rewarding things. There's a reason why support groups and clubs and, organizations exist, because people love being with people that share their ideas and values. And so, the import of all this is that the most natural way to take egoism is hedonistic egoism, where you just do whatever you think will make you happy in the moment. You don't maybe think too hard about it. You just seek pleasure and avoid pain. But that's like a best first search. You're doing whatever might seem right now like the best option, but you might be choosing a local maxima. You might be choosing something that's actually not the best option, even currently or in the long run. And you don't know. And a eudaimonistic egoist, eudaimonistic egoist, is essentially someone who's saying, yes, I agree with the hedonist that the goal is pleasure and the avoidance of pain, but let me try to do a breadth first search or something like that to find the most efficient, path there, the most efficient life plan. And of course, the life plan that's the most efficient for happiness is different for everyone, because everyone is, physically and mentally different. But just like the human genotype and phenotype falls within a certain range. That's what allows us to actually figure out what a human is and recognize a human when we see one. So what makes us happy, being determined by our genotype and phenotype, will fall within a certain range. And so for some people, what specifically makes them happy is going to be very similar to what specifically makes me happy. And some it might be very different. But for all humans, I think the three categories will factor into their happiness in some way. And, for some, being creative might be far more important than being sociable. And, some the other way around. And there might be a different balance for everyone and a different specific way that each of those capacities manifests itself in their life. But each one has to play a part. So, yeah. And I think this is where my conception of eudaimonia actually differs the most from that of other philosophers, because most natural law philosophers and virtue ethicists seem to hit upon the idea that the most fulfilling life is the life of a philosopher. And that's quite interesting because, of course, who's deciding that? The philosopher. And of course, they chose that life because they find it, because they think it's the most fulfilling. So of course, they would think it's the most fulfilling life. But for me, I understand that that might be different for other people. And so this might raise a question. Because a philosophy like this could say, someone who believes this philosophy could say, oh, well, that person is not living correctly. They're not living in the way that would best achieve their eudaimonia. Or we could say, this person is not fulfilling what it would truly mean to be them. They're not the best version of themselves. They're not fulfilling their purpose, so to speak. But as I discussed in the last video of my epistemology series, we don't have free will. And so one might consider that something that doesn't fulfill its purpose through no fault of its own perhaps can't be morally faulted for it. And first of all, I say that a recognition that something is performing badly is still an important recognition, because it allows us to suggest a fix to that person and tell them that they actually are going about things wrong. And it allows us to also identify who, where the problem is. Because if you have a lineup of 10 computers linked in a network, and something goes wrong in the network, and you examine each of the computers, right? And you turn up one that was malfunctioning, right? That someone had, set up the environment improperly, so the code was running incorrectly. That's the computer, that's the problem, most likely. And likewise, when it comes to humans interacting, if there's someone that's not living up to their eudaimonia, then that's probably where the problem lies. Because the thing you'll notice about my conception of eudaimonia is that it shouldn't lead to any conflict between people. Because everyone's eudaimonia is to only essentially act towards others as they would be okay with others acting towards them. So, and, should try to be independent and not leech off others, and should try to actually create things that might support others as well, and should try to interact on shared benefits and ideas. And even when people require their basic needs fulfilled, like eating and sleeping and so on, that need is usually matched by some other person's need to express empathy, because, of course, that's a natural part of being a mammal. Or in the case of sex and relationships, some other person's reciprocal need to express that need or capacity as well. And so, generally speaking, ignoring conditions of extreme scarcity, when there's a conflict between two people and it isn't resolved peacefully, and someone usually the violation of peace itself is a stepping outside of that person's eudaimonia, and the violation of the other person's eudaimonia, of course. And that's usually where the fault lies as well. And of course, I tend to go into much more detail on a conception of justice that expands on the living by moral principle component of the rational faculty, which explains a set of norms that should allow everyone to maximally fulfill their eudaimonia, that should maximize the amount of fulfillment of eudaimonia of any community that follows those norms. And of course, if that's true, then everyone should desire those norms, because if they don't contradict your own eudaimonia, and they shouldn't, and they in fact allow others to maximize eudaimonia, that means that those others are more likely to be willing to follow those rules as well, which means that you're more likely to be able to satisfy your eudaimonia in a society that follows those norms. And, of course, those you care about will also be more likely to be able to satisfy their eudaimonia. So I'll get into exactly what those norms are, among other things, in future videos. But for now, thank you for listening. And yeah, I think that's it.